Welcome to Abby Podcast, where we bridge the gap between perspectives so that I can venture into viewing the world as you see, and so you can see the world as I view.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So today's episode 4, and so for our audiences, this is Latifa. Do you actually want to talk a bit about yourself?
So my name is Latifa, and I was born and raised here in Auckland. I come from a Indian background, so my parents are Gujarati, which is, Gujarat is on the west coast of India. My dad was born in Fiji, my mum was born in New Zealand. So I'm Indian, Muslim, 5th generation New Zealander. Yeah, my mum's family have been here since like the early 1900s. The youngest of 3 sisters, so I've got 2 older sisters. I just kind of had like a pretty typical childhood, I think, like normal school, and then when I was 11 I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. Kind of just got a bit like harder to walk and a bit slower, and I started falling down all the time. And then when I was 14 I had surgery, and since then I've been using a wheelchair, kind of navigating that plus being Muslim, and I went to a pretty Pakar private school, so all those things added together was just, this kind of whole journey of belonging and identity and where do I fit in the country, do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then I just started uni, got an English degree, and then while I was at uni, I just started writing about my experiences and what, what I was observing about the world.
Good writer.
Thank you. Did that for a really long time, still doing that. Last year, I kind of just thought, okay, I've been writing about all of this stuff. What now? Do you know what I mean? Okay, people know what it's like to live with a disability, to be Muslim, to be brown, to be a woman, and all those things all at the same time. But what do I want people to do with that information, right? It's so easy to just say, this is the problem, but what's the solution? Do you know what I mean? Last year I started to consult on accessibility and inclusion, and I'm kind of just still finding my feet in there, but that's what I'm doing at the moment, and that's pretty much a rundown of my life. Oh, and in terms of work, I have a communications background, so I got my postgrad in journalism, and I've just kind of been doing that project work and just kind of all over the show, really.
Is that how you got into writing, with the communications degree? Because obviously you need a lot of writing. And
yeah, well, I think I started writing before that. I think it just kind of was my natural way of expressing myself, because again, youngest, I don't know how my sisters will feel about me saying this, but being the youngest, voice gets drowned out a little bit, and huge brown family, I found it was one of the only ways where I could really actually say how I was feeling without being interrupted.
What do you enjoy writing about the most?
I think I like to write things that people wouldn't typically think about. Trying to think of an example. So basically after the shooting, so that the week after that, I was on the bus going to work, and there was another young girl, I think she was an intermediate at the time, and they used to always just catch my bus, and she wore hijab, typically.
So that's the Christchurch mosque attack?
Yeah.
Just so the audiences know, yeah?
Yeah. So typically she wore hijab, and then one day, about a week after the shooting, I saw her on the bus, and she had taken it off, and I was like, okay, what's going on there? And it's not like I've ever spoken to her, it's just, I just saw her every day, and it got to the point where we would say hi to each other, because as you do. And I just felt really sad about that. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? That at that age, you kind of have to think okay, what choices can I make to make myself feel safe? And so I decided to write about that. Some people were like, oh, that's heartbreaking, having to make that decision and to dress in a way that's not comfortable or natural for you for your own safety. But then a couple of people were like, oh, well, maybe she just decided that it wasn't for her anymore. And I was just
how? Why would you? Because of this? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just, I wrote about that, and I think it just got people thinking about, how much choice do we actually have as women, as Muslim women, as people of color, as people who are visibly different. We are constantly having to police our bodies. This went really dark real quick.
What does identity mean to you? Have you built your own identity? Do you feel like you've had to build your own identity and sort of...
Yeah, I think I'm definitely more, I know myself better. I think that's a journey, right? Because your identity, it changes over time, right? Like, I mean, you are who you are, but then your identity in terms of like your relationship with other people, you know, like I'm a sister and I'm a daughter and I'm an auntie and I'm a cousin, you know, like I'm all these, I'm a colleague. I wear so many different hats, as we all do. So then I feel like identity is just a fluid thing. It just changes as life changes. But in terms of like being brown and being Muslim and being, you know, like a woman with a disability, I think these are all things that I have had to train myself to feel like actually this is who I am, and there was a big faith component to that in terms of like spirituality. You know, like if this is how I was created, that's who I am and I'm okay with that. Do you know what I mean? And actually there is nothing to be ashamed of for that, and there's nothing to be embarrassed about, because that is just how I was created. You know,
I've noticed with you've worked a lot in like the female and the Muslim community sector as well, and like you do a lot. Do you volunteer or?
So one project I've worked on is the Al Hijra project with the Khadija Leadership Network. So a few years ago they did this project to basically profile 5 Muslim women in the country who have made a contribution to Aotearoa New Zealand. And the whole genesis of that was actually Muslim women are the backbone of our community. Do you know what I mean? Like we do all this work in the background and our names are not in the newspapers and they're not in the news and they're not, you know, but we, you know, in the education sector, in the social sector, like in every part of life, like we're here doing the hard yards. And so we profiled 5 incredible women who have basically dedicated their life to service and community and country, you know, proud Muslim women, you know. And I think that for me, you know, as a writer, as a storyteller, was probably one of my favorite projects, because that's all about, firstly, it's about documenting our history, right? So that it doesn't get lost. And also just taking inspiration from people who have been there, done that, you know, and can give you wisdom and advice to take with you about, you know, don't ever forget where you came from, and, you know, checking your intentions and just being good with everything that you do.
What advice would you have for someone growing up in New Zealand, you know, that's from a different ethnic background, different religion?
If people are picking on you, those people are not going to matter in 5 years. Like,
I wish at that time they knew. It's not gonna, it's hard.
It is really hard, like at that age, right? When you're a teenager, when you're a kid, to think about 5 years from now, because at that point, like school, like that is your world, right? Like that is the only school and home, like, and maybe if you do extracurricular, like that's your only
life.
And so, you know, that is everything for you. And so I know that the damage that can cause. And so I would say, like 5 years, those people aren't going to matter, and maybe even in 5 years those people will change themselves. And, you know, and maybe those people will become better people. You know, because I feel like in high school everyone's a bit of a dickhead sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, everyone makes mistakes, basically.
I mean, it's high school.
It's like, high school. It's like you're still
the years where you change, and you change through so many identities, and you change for, like,
and the change continues. Like right through to uni. I feel like even at 18, like I feel like that's young. It's a lot easier for people of colour, like for kids from migrant backgrounds, because it's like they don't have to worry about what their lunchbox smells like, or they can, you know, people know what like Eid and Diwali is now, you know, like people,
they're more
and
acceptable,
they love ethnic food, and they love, like, you know, culture and I guess diversity. Like, it's kind of, I feel like we're moving in that direction. Like, when we were kids, if somebody looked at my dal and rice in my lunchbox, and they'll be like, oh, what's that, you know? But I feel like now they'll be like, oh, yum, that smells so good, you know?
Don't get me started. I had like, we were talking about this in one of the podcast series about lunch, and like mine had like, there's this thing called shifter, and like it's, you cut up tomato, onion, and a lot of garlic and meat and whatnot, and you kind of squish it and you fry it, kind of like pakora, but with you know, kind of like that. And so we used to put them in, Mum used to put them in like wraps with gherkin and a whole lot of stuff, and like that's really yum. But and everybody's bag used to be in the same little, by the toilet. I mean, I don't know, my primary school, like everyone had to hold their bag, so when everyone's rushing in, you just go and you can smell your food. I used to be like, oh my god, but I was so hungry.
And I think the other thing is that kids these days are more comfortable to call things out if they don't like it. You know, like I think people are more, actually they're less tolerant of intolerance. Yeah, I feel like kids these days are less tolerant of, you know, racism and sexism and Islamophobia and all that kind of stuff because of probably social media. It's like less cool to be racist now than it was when we were kids.
Latifa, tell us a bit about your consulting work.
Oh, so like I said, it just kind of came up because I was thinking like if someone was to read that who was in a position of power, what are they gonna do with it, you know? And if we get people who don't have lived experience just going away and running with it, the chances are is that it's gonna probably end up doing more damage than good. So I thought, like, if I can take everything that I've written in the last 10 whatever years and transform that into tangible action and a tangible plan of actually how can I make sure that someone else who's coming up in my situation does not have to go through what I went through, that would be the ultimate kind of result for me. So that's kind of why I went into consulting, is to kind of just take what I know from my life and, I don't know, like guide, is that the right word? Like people in the right direction, because ultimately what they do is their decision, but I think it's up to me to say, from what I know and from what I've experienced, this is what needs to be done. And I feel like when you are in a minority, it's really important to, if you have the opportunity to be at that table, to take it. And if you don't have that opportunity, then you need to do what you can to be at that table and take your friends along with you. So that's basically it for me. Like, that's my why.
Taking in your experience and literally trying to make change or forcing change, because I guess this sort of relates to kind of links as the last question. What do you want to do? Like, what's your ultimate, like, I made it in life kind of, you know, like the one thing you want to sort of achieve, or like...
I think my purpose, is to just be the person who challenges people to think differently and to think creatively. And I think my purpose is to just have interesting conversations like this and to hopefully, inshallah, make change from that, because it might not happen overnight, but if it happens in 10, 15, whatever years,
you've planted a seed.
I'm happy with that, you know? And so, yeah, I think it really is just a matter of one conversation at a time. Yeah.
Nice.
My purpose in life is to have interesting conversations.
Well, I'd love to have you again. So thank you so much for coming along. It's really good to like kind of have you in our project and just like share your experiences. Do you want to leave a note? Do you want to, anything you want to leave the audiences with?
I think I'm good. I think people who are already listening are, you know, they get it.
Yeah.
You know, we all know that without diversity and representation, this world will be really boring. And so I think it's important to celebrate that.
Yeah. This episode is sponsored by New Zealand Lottery Grants Board, so thank you guys so much. And I shall talk to you soon, Latifa.
See you later.
This episode is funded by New Zealand Lottery Grants Board. Thank you for your support and generosity.